On Friday, May the 9th, it will be time for the annual Moscow Victory Day Parade. That special occasion when Vladimir Putin, any senior Russian figures that haven't been deposed or jailed that year, and a handful of foreign dignitaries who happen to be in favour, they all get to watch a bunch of soldiers go marching past with weapons that trundle past, all very slowly. And all in commemoration of the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. Now, it's not the sort of event that I would normally cover, to be fair, except that this year, when there might be an unusually sharp frisson of excitement in the air for all of the attendees, because Ukraine has casually dropped into the conversation that it can't guarantee the safety of any of the dignitaries who choose to attend this year. They didn't quite use the words "nice parade you got there, shame if anything were to happen to it," but they might as well have done. Or as one Ukrainian source put it, the parade constitutes a valid military target. An argument that was underlined by Ukraine's military intelligence chief Kyrylo Budanov, who said that guests to the parade should, quote, bring earplugs. Now, why does it matter? And will they actually do something? Will Ukraine actually target the Moscow parade? Well, let's discuss. Now, Putin took steps to try to avoid this, as if prompted by President Trump's whining about the lack of action on his part to negotiate peace. He suddenly announced a 3-day ceasefire, conveniently timed around the Moscow parade. On the surface level, Ukraine has been trying to prove to Trump that it is bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, eager to see peace, and willing to sign up to a 30-day ceasefire at the drop of a hat. So Putin may have felt that they would have felt pressured into agreeing to this 3-day mini ceasefire, however transparent a ploy it may be. On other levels, you could see that it would be aimed at freeing up some resources on the battlefield to actually take part in the parade, maybe, or at least to defend it. But no, Ukraine dismissed the proposal as patently self-interested, said it would still happily sign up to a 30-day ceasefire, but they had no intention of reciprocating with this one. After all, a ceasefire is supposed to be something that's agreed to by both parties in a conflict, not just announced by one side at a time most useful to themselves, with the expectation the other side should comply with it. Not really how serious ceasefires have ever worked. Now, for Ukraine, this position is something of a win-win. Maybe they are serious about actually attacking the parade. But even if they're not, they have Putin terrified that they might. Just when he's got Xi Jinping and numerous other people very important to his operations, all gathered together to admire his country's military might in front of the eyes of the world, he could be embarrassed, they could potentially be put at risk by a show of force from Ukraine, evading all of their best efforts to keep them out. That has struck home to the man who normally they can't reach, to let him know that he is not invulnerable to Ukraine hitting him where and when it will hurt him the most. It's not as though it's not a credible threat. Ukrainian drones over Moscow have become, if not the new normal, certainly no longer that astonishing or unusual. The Russians have, for some reason, not been best pleased by the implied threat. Former President and Prime Minister of Russia and current Putin attack dog Dmitry Medvedev said that if anything happened during the parade, quote, nobody will be able to guarantee that Kiev will live to see May the 10th. Expected to attend alongside President Putin are Chinese President Xi Jinping, Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico, Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, and Venezuela's Nicolás Maduro. Whether because of Ukraine's discouragement to people to attend or for other reasons, a number of top leaders have dropped out. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi and also his Defence Minister, they both cancelled their trip. Well, to be fair, they are hovering on the brink of war right now with Pakistan, so they probably do have some rather important things to be getting on with. North Korea's Kim Jong-un is reportedly a possible no-show. Serbian President Alexander Vučić has called off. That impeccable and always exclusively factual Russian state media actually claimed that the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio might attend. Now, that was probably just trolling, to be fair. Rubio is known as a Russia hawk, but one that, of course, is doing everything in public required of a servant to Trump.
And I think that the country owes you a great debt of gratitude, and the world, really. Because, I mean, you're the only leader in the planet that can bring the two sides together to bring an end to this conflict, and that's what you've done.
So they could have just been teasing him with a version of what his boss might ask him to do next. It's been reported in a number of places because, let's face it, given everything we've seen in the last 3 months, it's not as though it's entirely beyond question. A couple of days after the suggestion broke, the Kremlin did officially say that it didn't have any information about such a planned visit. Didn't say he couldn't come. The guest list is restricted to countries considered to be friendly to Moscow. I guess you'd have to say the United States would certainly be on that list these days, even if both sides might think it's a bit early to be attending this particular day. So, do we think that Ukraine would actually carry out an attack so audacious to hit the parade? On the one hand, look, there'll be a bunch of military personnel marching down the street with military equipment. It is undisputable that that counts as a high-profile, legitimate military target. Indeed, if they could embarrass Putin so badly by successfully hitting it, you'd have to say there'd be some possibility at least that the loss of face and the weakness that would imply would at least become a real problem for him. But arguably, they've embarrassed Putin quite a bit by the mere suggestion that they could do this, and the obvious reaction that shows that Moscow's kind of worried that they might follow through. But the arguments for caution are also pretty compelling. Ukraine really does not want to be endangering Xi Jinping. I mean, preferably not any of the other visiting foreign leaders either, but certainly not that one. China is not wholly neutral in the war, but it is very determinedly not getting directly involved. And if that changed, well, things could get very hairy indeed. It would also be such a major blow to Putin's prestige that there would be a very strong chance of an outsized response. Maybe not wiping out the whole of Kyiv, a la Medvedev's threat, but certainly a major hit that would run the risk of out-of-control escalations into battlefield nuclear weapons. Without risking that, Kyiv has achieved a week of concern and worry and uncertainty, and indeed vulnerability for Vladimir Putin. It's not often they can reach him so directly. It's a reminder for Russia that yes, you can declare a war from your capital on another country, but having done that, you can't guarantee it doesn't come back to roost. By the way, the day after the US and Ukraine signed the long-awaited minerals deal, the Telegraph newspaper reported that America had announced it was stepping away from the peace process. That seemed like a major announcement. It was certainly reported as such, so I did what I always do, check to see who else was talking about it, checked the original source. Well, at that point, nobody much was talking about it. Certainly no American sources, which was surprising given the implications of the story. When I checked the original source, turned out to have been a passing comment by a spokeswoman for the State Department in response to a question near the end of a press briefing. It clearly was not intended to be a breaking news major policy shift announcement, and yet the Telegraph reported it as precisely that. In a couple of days afterwards, a few others, including the Times of London, who I would have expected better of, also reported it as a major policy change, never with any news sources, purely drawing from earlier speculation from Rubio and the words taken out of context from this press briefing. And yet, a number of YouTube channels also took the story on faith. I offer this up to you as a cautionary tale and a repeated commitment that I seek to double-check sources and present to you only the things that stand up to the reality test. Whether news comes from a mainstream source, as in this case, or a credentialed blogger or an uncredentialed blogger or creator, going back to the prime source is always the first thing I'll try to do, if at all possible. Sometimes there's a story that relies on anonymous sources within the White House or wherever, in which case, if it seems credible, then I will always make sure that I do mention that it came from such sources, so that you know. And look, that exact story could break properly tomorrow. It's not out of the question, but it hadn't then, even though some were reporting it as so. In a time when extraordinary things are going on every day, the temptation is always to sensationalize more and more, to jump on the rumors that sound credible, to be the first getting the story onto YouTube, to drive views. But then it turns out to be wrong. On this channel, I try to get the balance between, titles and thumbnails to make real life sound interesting and engaging while still being connected to real life. Hopefully that's an approach that you find value in which case do feel free to share or tell people about this channel to help it grow, because it's not optimized for maximum virality for that very reason. Always appreciated.